Hey guys, welcome.com or send an email at hi@thisdot.com. My name is Daniel Marin. I'm going to be your host today. And before we get started, I want to make a few announcements. I just want to remind everyone that we do a bunch of other events and we have a few ones coming up soon. We have Global GraphQL Meetup on November 10th. We have a Global React Meetup on November 12th. Then we got a GraphQL Contributor Days on November 17th. And then we have a Modern Web Meetup on November 18th. And we have a Global View Meetup on November 19th. We're all about modern JavaScript, so whatever suits your goal, we have events about almost everything out there. So you can reach us out in Twitter at this.media and find out more about the podcast, events, blogs, and all the fun stuff we do. And for today, we have Brandon Roberts. He's a senior Angular engineer, and he's in Narwhal. He's part of Narwhal and also an Ngrx maintainer. We also have, yeah, I got a little bit, shy. But we had Wes Grimes, but sadly he's not going to be joining us. But we got Jeff Cross that's going to be joining us today and helping us and trying to answer any questions you guys have about Ngrx. I think that's about it, and we're ready to just leave it up to you guys.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Say that up front.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank
you
you.
guys, for spending the time for joining us and be here today. I hope everyone's just excited as us. So let's bring it on.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I'll go ahead and say if anyone in the chat has questions, feel free to ask those, and we can try to answer those questions also. Um, yeah, I could at least talk in general about, or I guess start off with, in general about where we are with the Ngrx project, and um, since we released a few updates, since we released version 10, which came with two new packages. One was Ngrx Component, and the other was Ngrx Component Store. And the main focus, that I guess the main one that we've been focusing on since then has been Ngrx Component Store. And I will see if I can at least bring up the docs page here.
Could you do a demo of the Ngrx component
The component store.
or Ngrx component? Is it just the component store, or what else is there to it?
Yeah, well, there are two different things. The component, Ngrx component one is still pretty experimental, um, so I don't have a specific demo for that one. But Ngrx component or component store, sorry, Ngrx component is a way to bring more reactivity to your Angular templates. So if we're used to using the async pipe and or using the ngIf in your templates and kind of unwrapping those using assignments, Ngrx component will be a way for you to work more easily with observables and change detection in Angular, which that one was originally brought in by Michael Lackey, and we're still, like I said, that one's still considered experimental, so we're still ironing out the details on that one. And the other one is Ngrx Component Store, which the biggest thing about Component Store is that we basically have a solution for like both sides of like the state management solution, or have a solution for both sides of the state management needs. So if you have something for global state, we have Ngrx Store for that. Or even if you just need to manage state locally, we have Ngrx Component Store, which works for that.
So Ngrx component, you could actually use that without using any of the store component store or
Yeah,
or
both
standard store?
packages are both packages are completely independent of Ngrx store itself. Yeah, Ngrx
Mhm.
component and Ngrx component store are standalone packages
So
that
like
don't require that.
with Ngrx component, is it like its own decorator to replace the Angular component decorator? And
No,
you
Ngrx component today is just a couple of directives, or it's a directive
Mhm.
and a pipe. So there's the Ngrx let directive that you can use in place of uh, the like ngIf and async pipe together to unwrap like an observable for your template, and the push pipe is another one that actually works with. It's a drop-in replace. Both of them are can be drop-in replacements for the async pipe, which you can
but
use Ngrx.
push will actually trigger change detection, whereas
Mhm.
async pipe doesn't, right? The
Yeah,
async pipe just marks something as dirty, so that next time change detection runs, it'll check it.
yeah.
But push will
So,
actually do that additional step needed, so you could actually do zoneless, as fully
mhm.
zoneless application if you're using push everywhere.
Right. Yeah, and it's like I said, it's still experimental, so that we're looking at ironing out those details more to where you could have a fully zoneless solution without and still have the same functionality you do today. So Nginx component is a step in that direction that we're working on there.
So Brandon, with the LED directive, we will be able to access an observable emissions without using the, well, I always have this problem with the NGF that is
Mm-hmm.
if my value coming through the observable is a faulty value,
Mm-hmm.
then, my element is not displayed or whatever, and what if I want to use that faulty value anyway? So with the LED directive, is this problem solved?
Yeah, that's the goal of the Nginx let directive is to let you, or is so that you can work with your observables in your template without having to do the async or the ngIf and the async pipe, or ngIf and then the assignment, or using the assignment. So ngIf and then you subscribe to something in as assign it in your template. So it'll allow you to, it won't be, falsy at first. So you can actually render something and then it will, when the value comes through, it will, populate it that way. Because it
Cool.
seems
So
that is a very common pattern that we have to do today as far as using ngIf and then the reassignment.
does it have a similar like placeholder for when there's no value emitted from the observable, like with ngIf, how you do the like you'll have a container that you
Mm-hmm.
default to until the observable has outputted something truthy, as Dan
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
specified.
Yeah, I believe it does. It still has some of those same things that you can use with the um, use
But it
with
doesn't
the
require a truthy value. It just requires
right,
any value to come from the observable.
right, yeah.
Yeah, because with the async pipe, I think it first emits a null value,
Mm-hmm.
or like
Yeah,
not emit, but
always.
like sets a null value.
Yeah, yeah. Regardless of what your value is of your observable that you have, even if you had like a behavior subject that had an initial value, the first one that comes out of the async pipe is going to be null, and then it's going to update to whatever the next value is, assuming it's a different one that's in the behavior subject, so, or whatever stream or be a promise for that matter that you're having in your component or template. So.
By the way, if folks have questions, I think YouTube is the place where they can ask them, right? So in the YouTube chat,
Mhm.
and Brandon, the expert, will.
Yes, I would answer or try to answer your question, and then if I'm not able to answer your question here, then I will. You can ping me on afterwards on Twitter or something, and then we can discuss it there further.
So
Yeah. So
I
yeah.
have some questions, but like if you got other things to say, go ahead and say it. But there's
No.
some
Yeah.
other
Go
things.
ahead.
So with so what is it with component store? You said it's kind of experiment, or not component store, but component
Hmm.
that it's still kind of experimental. what is it that there are some design issues that need to be worked out still with it, or what are the, or is
Yeah,
it just a matter of battle testing it?
our stance at least on that is like a fully zoneless application is like still I believe an evolving concept, and like even in the Angular ecosystem there are libraries out there today that you can use that will give you a fully zoneless solution, such as Rx Angular State, for example. But and I believe they're working with the Angular team on those, but it's still at the end of the day, it's still a separate solution outside of the framework itself. And I think that in general, we will want more guidance, at least from the Angular team, or what their idea, like the idea of what a fully zoneless application is, what the mental model is there, so that we can kind of tailor a solution that's reactive around that. Because you could potentially, or you can, like I said, build a fully zoneless application today, but you're going to have to jump through a few hurdles and like undo some things that Zone.js is doing to be able to accomplish that today. So I think more integration with the framework is needed before like a fully I don't know what the right term is.
Like a less hacky zoneless application?
I don't want to use the term hacky, but yeah, one that's just more integrated in with the framework that you can just recommend and not have a lot of caveats with.
Outside of change detection and like updating views, do you know what other things? So, like what other things zones are doing that need to be accommodated if you're going fully zoneless?
Not
There's
specifically.
exception, like async, like exception, like tracking the logs for exceptions asynchronously. Most that go through zones.
Yeah, that's one thing that would be or not necessarily available without zoneless, but working with observables in the template is being able to access like those error conditions and the other parts that come out of those streams. But on the zoneless side, I'm not sure, besides patching events or listening, I guess from my understanding, those are the main things that you have when you add zones to your application, is patching all those browser events or trying to work around some of the things that it can't necessarily patch, like async await. Like there's just no support for that because it's baked into the browser. So eventually, if that becomes a thing, then we'll have to look at another way to get around using that. So async await, I would think, is another issue that you have to get around if you, or an issue that presents itself because you have zones in your app.
So yeah, that's a good point, because I assume TypeScript, if you're targeting ES 2015 or earlier, then I assume it will just patch that, or it'll convert it to promises. But if you're using differential loading, does TypeScript convert async await to promises, or does it actually output async await in the code?
Yeah, I'm not sure there. I would think that it would output the browser, like the native browser async await in the browser. So,
by the way, if folks don't know what I mean by differential loading, I mean like how you can tell the browser to load either the modern JavaScript or like ES5 JavaScript. I think those are the two things.
I think differential loading was introduced in version 8 or 9, I believe. But yeah, and differential loading, like you said, allows you to ship two versions of your app, one that's built for more modern browsers and doesn't have as many polyfills in it, and then the other one for legacy browsers that need more polyfills on top, that need to, they have larger bundles, but they have more support for legacy browsers.
Yeah, and they both are included in the document as script tags, but they have the module and no module attributes so the browser can decide which one they want to use.
Yeah, I see a couple of questions here in the chat if we want to take a couple of those.
I was looking at the private chat.
I was about to.
Oh, okay. Yeah, if you can highlight the first one is, can we pass parameters to Ngrx component store selector when calling it from a component? And for passing to a selector, I don't believe you can pass parameters to a selector in that way. But if you have so what you can do is, you can wrap your selector, the function that creates a select, wrap that in a method in the class. So you can pass arguments that way to your selector, and it will still operate on it that way, taking that a value that you pass in. Or you could, another way is, if you have a stream of that parameter, you can combine that with the selector in the component store together. So it's easy to compose streams together in a component store selector, as opposed to like the global store where you have like a selector function that takes parameters. So you have maybe have a little more flexibility there, as far as, well, you have the same flexibility in either case, as far as passing an argument before you create the selector itself. It's just not part of that, like that object at the end of a selector when you define it. So the next one is there any simple solution when using Ngrx data and the API requests are messy and inconsistent? I think you have to customize a lot of the handlers in Ngrx data if your APIs aren't consistent. That's a big thing about Ngrx data. It has a lot of opinions of how your API request should be, and follow standardized practices there. So if your APIs are consistent, then you're going to have an easier time, or you're going to have a more straightforward time with trying to interact with those APIs using Ngrx data. If you have a lot of differing APIs, then you're going to have to either look at adding some more custom handlers in Ngrx data, or you may just have to roll your own Ngrx effects for those situations, where it gives you a little more flexibility than what you would get in Ngrx data. So it's not meant to cover all corner cases, but like I said, if you get into one of those situations, it may just be less work to just roll an effect, an action and an effect to talk to your services that way, and have a little more control over those other APIs.
Yeah, I was about to mention, like, I always thought that if you have like a very straightforward API, you can use Ngrx data, but like Ngrx entity, it's better in cases where you need something more tailor-made for your solution. Is that true, or is that a wrong statement?
No, yeah, I think.
By the way, Dan, I think your mic might be pulling from that mic that's up there instead of the other mic, so it's kind of echoey. It's just a little bit hard to hear.
Okay.
But yeah, to answer your question, yes, Ngrx data, like I said, Ngrx data does have some flexibility there. So I want to say that up front, that you can customize some of the behavior in Ngrx data, but it's more meant to work with like under like a standard setup, or a more strict setup, as opposed to just vanilla or idiomatic Ngrx with an action and an effect, using it that way. So that's why I say if you have to use it for those to be more flexible, then you may just have to reach for the regular process than using it that
Reach
way.
for the stars, if you will.
There you go.
Oh, now I can't hear you at all, Dan. Sorry, I may have.
Thanks, Jeff.
I was just echoing the comments.
Yeah.
Yeah, I saw the comments. I was trying to figure it out, but can you hear me?
Yeah, now
Yeah,
it's good.
it's better.
It's better now?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
All right, don't touch anything. You're
Yeah, I'm
Yeah,
not touching anything
I
else.
did see some people. There was one person that said they work with both React Redux and Ngrx, and they prefer Ngrx. And I would say, first of all, I would say thank you, and I would say I would like to understand. I'm sure I would like to understand, and the other end of Redux, or React Redux maintainer would like to understand why. But we can talk about that maybe afterwards. Let's see. There was one question. This is more of a not necessarily Nginx specific, but it was just why Angular has been evolving so much with many versions out. And I guess I can speak to that a little bit. So Angular, like with any framework, Angular wants to continue to push the web forward and continue to mature and move as the web moves and continue to get people to upgrade to the next version. So the moment that Angular starts to not keep pushing forward, then I think that people will wonder about the future of it. Or that's been something recently, at least in the ecosystem, of what the future of Angular is. So Angular is on a pretty strict schedule, not a strict schedule, but has a schedule about releases that are happening every 6 months. So then they take what things they're gonna put into the next release to keep pushing the framework forward. So I think evolving is just a natural part of that. We still want Angular to move forward because it's used in a lot of places. So I think that's that particular reason why.
So there was a good question from EON. I'm sorry if I'm saying the name wrong. But so they've got a monorepo, and it's a front-end project that has 3 different front-end apps, and they all share different libraries in the project. They're looking to add a global router store that resides in a library itself, and each app will import that global library. And so at runtime, each app will have its own instance of the global router store. That sounds like it makes sense to me. Like if you've got 3 apps that, so it sounds like there are 3 similar apps. Maybe they're just shipping to, like they have different form factors or something, but the similar routes. Maybe you could speak to it better, Brandon. You probably understand it better.
Yes, it's global router store, and each library itself will import global router library. I don't see why you wouldn't. I'm just going to use Nx for an example because that's what we do. You would have a library that you generate within your Nx workspace and put the router store. I would suggest you put the router store, register that in the ng module of that library, and also the reducer that registers the state for that router, so that when you import that module into each one of those applications, that you get the state, the router key, and you get the registration of Nginx router store along with it. So that way, you still have a library that's shared amongst 3 apps that at their own runtime will get the router store and the router key. As long as you have like your global store registered with each app. Also, I think there's at least at a minimum you need the store to be imported in the root of that application also to use that along with the router store.
So for people who aren't familiar with the router store, could you give a quick explanation of what it is and how it replaces the Angular router or doesn't replace, or what its responsibility is?
Yeah, so Nginx router store is a set of bindings that integrate with the Angular router. It doesn't replace the Angular router, but you can use, if you're using Nginx store for as like global state management in your app, you can add Nginx router store to listen to some of the events that happen throughout each navigation cycle with the Angular router. And what that gives you is we have a set of pre-built selectors that come along with router store that you can subscribe to as you would any other observable off the store. And what that gives you is you can listen to like a stream of the URL changes, as opposed to, if you do something like that with the Angular router, you kind of have to listen to like when the navigation ends, and then you have to like switch that back to the router URL in that case. But if you're using that, then you can just use a selector to listen to the URL or get router parameters, or actually use, and it allows you to more easily integrate the router store with your Ngrx state. So you can combine those two things together. Let's say you navigate to a particular route, you can get the route params out of the router store and get your state along with it and perform some task with that. So it kind of builds around the ecosystem of the store itself to let you build selectors off of that, or build data points or extra data that you may need for your component or service, or wherever you're going to use it.
Cool. So I I tend to do this a lot. I create I listen to the query params observable, and I dispatch an action so I can have, like, let's say, an active ID or something in my store. So you will say that in that case it's better to go with the router store.
Yeah, I would say the router store will let you listen to those query params in the same way. So let's say you had to combine those with some piece of state that you already have in the store. So you can get both of those values together, without having to push them to an observable or like combine latest with the router or something like that first, to get some data or do something with that data that you need.
Awesome.
Yeah, because some of the things in the Angular router are just synchronous just by default. If you inject a router into your service, or you inject the activated route into your service or component, you can get at the query parameters or the query param map that way also. But like I said, if you want to combine those with some global state, then it becomes more straightforward to do it that way, as opposed to having to take a stream from the router and then take a stream from the state and combine those two things together.
Cool. We're about to be out of time, so if anyone has any more questions, so we can wrap up. A last question. Does anyone want to go ahead? You included, Jeff.
I was going to ask about schematic support for all these features like component store. Does everything that Ngrx provides, even like component, are there schematics, first class schematics for all those things?
There are schematics. The only one that doesn't have schematics,
but I guess I should say like schematics. If you don't know, they're the things in Angular CLI or NX that you use for code generation. Sorry, go ahead,
Right.
Brandon.
Yep. So component store, I believe, is the only one that doesn't have schematics at the moment, but it's easy enough to spin up a service. You could generate a service and just extend component store. You could generate a service as you normally would with a schematic, and then just have that service extend component store. We are looking at adding schematics for component store so that you can generate the service that extends component store, and optionally provide a component that you want to inject that store or that service into, so that it will be one less thing you have to remember to, because that is one thing in order for a component store to live with the life cycle of the component, you have to add it to the components providers. So we're looking at adding a schematic that will do that for you. It will generate the service, extend component store, and add it to the providers of the component, so that when the component gets destroyed, that service gets destroyed, just out of the box.
Yeah, somebody actually was just asking about when to use component store versus global store, and I think that's, you kind of answered it, where it's basically if you want it to live and die with the component, and it's not something that it's not some shared state that anyone outside the component should need, then component store is the solution for that.
Yep, that's it. You got
What about
global for everyone, or local that is just for that life cycle.
And should component store be responsible for all state for that component? Like, are there trade-offs if you would have some properties that are still just being dirty checked, or like are outside the store that are just fields on the component?
I think consistency is key in those areas to keep your state in the service that extends component store. Just so you'll, I think if you lean into just thinking of building components reactively using that at the local level, then it will keep you more future proof than having some in with the component or just some properties on the component itself or some locally in the component store.
And definitely apart from the component store, but more on the component directive side, like it'll make you more zoneless friendly for the future.
Yep.
To not have those fields require.
I would say the more you rely on the reactivity, the less you have to rely on zones to be a signal for when something needs to happen.
Cool. So we're out of time. Thank you both. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Brandon, for answering all the questions to everyone here today. I'm sorry for the mic problems. I'm sad that Nori told me before. I wish that didn't happen, but I hope you guys don't hate me too much. And
I think it'd be okay.
It was mostly like
it.
I only brought it up because I knew you would want to know.
Yeah, I am exactly the person I wanted to know. But well, thank you everyone, and I hope to see everyone else in future sessions. I just want to remind everyone that we are doing also React meetups, Vue meetups, GraphQL meetups. So if you're interested, all you have to do is to go to this.labs on Twitter or this.lab media and find out more. And thank you everyone, and see you in the next session. Bye.
See ya.